Hi, everyone. Matt Mayberry here, your host of Get Better Today. We have a fascinating and inspiring conversation today with Elliott Parker, who is the founder and CEO of High Alpha Innovation, a venture builder that partners with universities, corporations to co-create startups that solve compelling problems in the world. This is a fascinating conversation where we talk about driving innovation, maximizing efficiency, and so many other fantastic things, along with his recently published book, The Illusion of Innovation, which I had the privilege to read this book already, full of wonderful, high value ideas, whether you're a startup entrepreneur, co-founder of a startup right now that trying to get it off the ground running, or you're an executive leader at a large or medium-sized company. This book, The Illusion of Innovation, so many wonderful ideas. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Thank you so much. Elliott, your journey has been incredible. One thing that really stuck out to me, this passion and really intrigue and excitement for innovation and driving efficiency throughout organizations really started during your first job out of college at Arthur Andersen, when I believe one thing went wrong in the company and that caused the downfall of Arthur Andersen, and that really started your passion. I would love to start with you kind of explaining a little bit of that backstory of what fueled this passion for innovation and maximizing efficiency.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I was at this story not for as part of consulting division, and really fun job working with corporations trying to figure out what intellectual property they have and we could commercialize and do in exciting ways. Super fun, and the company was going well, doing great. I never imagined it would disappear. And over the course of about 6 weeks, it evaporated. Tens of thousands of employees, billions of dollars in revenue, and just went away. There was a accounting team was part of the Enron debacle, and as a result, the accounting firm got indicted, and nobody wanted to work with us anymore for good reason. And work with an accounting firm that's been indicted by the Justice Department. Ultimately exonerated, by the way, but it didn't matter at that point. The firm didn't exist anymore. So for me, it was a lesson in just how nothing that seems stable really is. Even these large organizations that are, maybe are built up over 100 years can crumble really quickly. And that, there's a lesson in kind of the fragility of large organizations, but also a lesson for me in the importance of controlling your own fate, not relying on institutions to be the source of success for your path in life.
Yeah. What was and we don't have to get into too many specifics, but what about just that downfall and that collapse, if you will? What about it, as time went on, I'm sure more and more things came to light and came to fruition. But is there one thing that really stuck out in your mind that really drove this passion for a deep level of just efficiency and building healthy companies that are not only profitable, but also that drive and enhance, maximize innovation?
Yeah, building companies that are resilient, where one little thing doesn't create the collapse. We want our larger institutions, these large corporations, universities, governments, even to the extent they're producing societal surplus and doing good, we should want them to endure, and to not only endure, but to thrive and continue to provide a societal surplus. If they're not providing societal surplus, then fine, let's let them go out of business or cease to exist. If they're doing good, we should want them to endure. It's through these large organizations that we collaborate as people and solve important problems. These large organizations can do things that you or I as individuals cannot, or small teams cannot. And so we need them to be effective. And my experience at Arthur Andersen started this path of this understanding what makes an organization resilient, what makes an organization fragile. And it proves out that a lot of the work that organizations do to try to be more resilient, ironically, actually leads them to be more fragile and more susceptible to failure. And I think this is something more people need to know about if they're serious about building resilient, enduring institutions. We're going about it the wrong way.
Out of the most resilient organizations that you've worked with and partnered with and even seen with your own experiences, what would you say is the number one characteristic that they all share in some shape or form?
They have an ability, they have a deep care for their stakeholders, their customers, past, present, and future. And this is the difference. I was in Japan last week where we're launching the company. And I went to this temple in Kyoto, where called Kiyomizu Temple. It's an amazing place. Old, I think it was originally built in the 600s. And the process for manufacturing that temple is almost a sacred thing. So they're very careful about where the wood is sourced from and the construction techniques that are used. And what I learned from a Japanese colleague we were there with was that the temple actually owns a couple of mountains nearby where the trees are grown to produce the wood for the temple. And they just redid the floors at this temple a couple of years ago. The wood lasts about 15 years, but those trees that they used to do the floor were planted for that purpose by someone 400 years ago. And the people who are running that temple today are planting trees that will be harvested 400 years from now to replace the floors. That's incredible that they're thinking about that in terms of those timeframes, well beyond their own lifetimes. And that type of understanding and concern and care for stakeholders, past, present, and future, is what leads to these organizations, helps them to be more resilient. In the corporate world, there's a good example of this too. A few years ago, Jeff Bezos, when he was running Amazon, he was asked, or caused a controversy when he was at a company meeting and explained to the employees of Amazon that Amazon was going to go bankrupt one day, certainly would fail and go out of business one day. Of course, that's true. But everyone thought, how, as the CEO of a company, how can you possibly say this thing? And that it's important to note what he also said after that to the employees. He said it was their job to prolong the company's existence and to put off that bankruptcy for as long as possible by continuously experimenting in the service or customer needs. So it's continuous experimentation and service or customer needs. As long as the organization can do that effectively, it deserves to stick around and to survive. Right.
Yeah, I remember a quote from Bezos where he's talking about one of the things that needs to be done is not so much looking at the competition. I think a lot of leaders and organizations tend to have an external focus on the competition. But I remember him talking about what do we expect the customer to be valuing or doing in 10 years and how can we beat them there? Right? Always placing that emphasis. So I find that fascinating, you sharing that example there, because I think so much of that quote that I shared that really piqued my interest about just kind of their level of innovation and this ability to disrupt themselves, if almost. That's constantly built at Amazon, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a version of the temple in Kyoto, right? It's not 400 years, it's 10 years from now. But what are our stakeholders 10 years from now going to be concerned about? Let's meet them there. Let's solve problems for them. That ability to continuously experiment in service of that is what leads to these organizations become really resilient. I don't know that you can look at in the book that I wrote. You can there's examples of organizations, companies that have lasted more than 1,000 years. Right, some of these, the oldest company in the world was launched 100 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, 1,500 years ago, something like that, and continuously operating. These organizations all do a version of what I think we see in recent years at Amazon being done pretty well, just cost experimentation and search for needs. These organizations that have lasted 1,000 years plus, certain things they have in common. One of those is the ability to experiment. It's knowing what needs to stay constant, what cannot change, and then recognizing that everything else can. So there's certain elements of the operation. There's an example of an old inn in Japan that was launched in the 600 or 700. And, they accept credit cards now. It was about hundreds of years ago. But there's certain elements of the business that do not change. They've got their sacred springs that they use for their onsen there. And that's not going to change. That's going to stay the same forever. Everything else changes. Their food, the bedding, right? That's a very small example, but these organizations are really good at understanding what needs to stay the same, but recognize that everything else should change. Not only can, but should, has to change.
Elliott, what would you say is wrong with the way that we measure success of companies today?
It's a great question. Over the last 50 plus years, everybody talks about the financialization of everything. And a sign of that, when we talk about companies and their success, primary metrics we use to measure success of companies are things like return on invested capital, return on net assets, internal rate of return. These financial metrics that prioritize capital efficiency, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but can be overdone. And what I mean by that is these companies look at ROIC, return on invested capital, for example. You've got a numerator or a denominator in that equation. And if you're running a company, especially a publicly traded company, you can play with the numerator or denominator. If you're looking at return on net assets, it's a lot easier to remove assets from your balance sheet. Will make your remaining assets more efficient. And what happens is organizations trying to drive these metrics and trying to drive capital efficiency make decisions where they're good maybe for the short term and in terms of spiking that capital efficiency, generating cash, not good for long-term resilience of the organization. What those metrics do is they tell an executive, for example, to shut down a factory or close down an assembly line. That's an easier and more appealing thing to do because it drives the metric a lot better than, for example, launching and holding your business, taking somewhere. What's good for the organization over the long run may be the latter, right? Starting a new thing. The metrics don't reward that. And so we make decisions about investment that end up as a result being fairly short-term oriented and drive profitability. We saw this in COVID, right? To a great degree where you had these companies that were super efficient because capital, evidence this is true, by the way, there's more capital on corporate balance sheet than ever before in history, massive amounts of money. And yet these companies are going out of business faster. Their lifespans are shrinking at the same time. We ought to maybe do something different. I think there are other ways to measure the success of companies, including just sheer endurance, right? If you look at the total profit under the curve over the life of a company, that's a more important measure than the spike in any individual quarter or year. Yet somehow we've decided that quarterly and annual metrics are what matter most, rather than looking at profitability, for example, over a decade or maybe over 100 or 400. You feel it, right? I think we ought to be looking at these things a little bit differently. You consider other metrics in the mix. During COVID, all these companies that were highly capital efficient, they built these amazing supply chains, for example, where everything just in time, arriving, no waste whatsoever. One piece of that system breaks and the whole thing comes crashing down. So that capital efficiency, it turns out in the long run, is not capital efficient. When something breaks down altogether, it stops. The lesson is that organizations need to have some element of redundancy, maybe even some element of capital inefficiency by choice that can help them to be more resilient over the long run. Over the long run, resilience always will be efficient.
That's a perfect segue into what really drove you to your career of helping corporations embrace this degree of inefficiency in order to really drive and accelerate growth.
There's one of my favorite movies on innovation. Probably the best movie ever on innovation is Ford versus Ferrari. Good movie for other reasons too.
Great movie.
It's actually an amazing movie on innovation because you've got this contrast in the movie. You've got the plot of the story is Ford Motor Company, big corporation, massive corporation, partners with Shelby, Carroll Shelby, who's got this startup that builds little race cars. And together they're trying to beat Ferrari at the race in Le Mans in France. And what's interesting is you see throughout the movie the contrast between what the small startup can do and what the corporation can do. There's a great scene, for example, where Shelby shows up at the racetrack and Ford is running the car around the track, and it got a heavy, expensive computer in the passenger seat that's measuring all the element performance of the car. And Shelby shows up and his team rips the computer out, throws it on the track, and then takes a yard on the outside of the car to measure the airflow, like just by looking at it through binoculars. See how the car does around the track. Cheap, fast, very effective. And then there's another scene in the movie that's where Henry Ford III is sitting at his office in Dearborn, Michigan, looking out at the factories Ford operates, and Shelby comes in and Ford explains to Shelby how during World War II, these factories were repurposed in a matter of weeks to produce airplanes for the war effort, something a startup could never do. And I think it's a good lesson. We need both. We need startups and we need large organizations, large corporations to both be effective. And the magic comes for me when you can leverage the strengths of both. Corporations have this amazing ability to execute at scale. They're so good at execution and doing it across the world in some cases. They're really bad at learning. Corporations are designed to propagate what they've already done, to preserve what exists, and to be safe and to make things predictable. And that's good to a point. Startups, on the other hand, are terrible at execution, but they're really good at learning. Corporations are really capital efficient. Startups, by design, are capital inefficient, meaning they have constraints, a limited amount of time and capital, but we're kind of stumbling around trying to figure out something that works. And in the process, they're really good at learning. You could combine the market understanding and ability to execute at scale of a large corporation with that learning abilities of a startup. Not only would the corporation and the startup each be better off, but society would be better off. We could solve some really important problems in more efficient ways. And I think I think we're in this kind of massive trend of decentralization where due to changes in technology, access to capital, communications, the building blocks that exist in terms of technology advancement more readily available to people. Small teams and individuals are more empowered to do big things that decades ago could only be done by corporation. Well, we're in this trend of decentralization. Corporations need to recognize that things have changed. There's a lot more power in the hands of individuals and small teams, and that we have to find ways to collaborate and to cross the divide so that everybody's better off.
Absolutely. I know, Elliott, a lot of the listeners, this is perfect segue into, a lot of the listeners are probably leaders and executives that run large to medium-sized organizations. And I think one of the drawbacks or excuses that I always hear, because that's many of the organizations I work with, not many startups, is we're not nimble enough or agile enough to operate like a startup. Or if we have 200,000 employees or 25,000 employees, how can we start innovating? What would you say is a way that large to medium-sized organizations can have that level of not only decentralization, but really spark levels of innovation and really develop these powerful, small, agile teams that you're discussing?
Great question. I mean, what we hear often is a lot of these organizations, large corporations, will say, we need to act more like a startup. And in most cases, that's actually a terrible idea. So let's start with that. Most startups go out of business. If you're running a scaled corporation, don't act more like a startup. You don't want to put that corporation at risk and go out of business. But to your point, there are some things we can learn. And the primary lesson of the book, if I were to summarize it, is we need to think about ways to run more experiments, fast, cheap, and weird. And fast and cheap are obvious. By weird, what I mean is experiments that challenge the status quo, or challenge assumptions that we have about the way the world works and what we already believe to be true. As a corporation scales, every corporation started out as a scrappy startup, right? Came into the market, found a niche, got up the hole, started getting traction. And over time, as that organization scales, they develop systems of governance, how we make decisions, incentive systems, talent that we pull in, processes that we use to get things done. All of that is optimized for capital efficiency, for doing things really efficiently, very predictably, very safely. When you're inside a corporation, feel like, boy, decisions are made by committee. We never get anything done. That is by design. That is a system operating as it was designed to do, to preserve and to be safe and to not take risk. The challenge is that we all know organizations need to learn to adapt. And when a large corporation takes that system of governance, incentives, talent, process, and tries to repurpose this thing that's been built for execution, repurpose it for learning, we're all surprised when it doesn't work. We shouldn't be. It's a fundamentally different activity. And so what we have to do is find new ways of governance, incentives, new talent, new processes that are optimized for learning. Well, those systems exist already inside of startups. The trick for corporations to become more resilient, to develop serendipity, to uncover the anomalies that lead to new insights and new paths for growth, is to run as many experiments as they can at the lowest possible cost per experiment. In the world of business, startups are fantastic experiment engines. And so corporations ought to, among the other tools they use to innovate and to run experiments and the hopes of driving more resilience, they ought to consider ways that they might engage better with startups. That includes investing, partnering with, and in some cases building new ventures from scratch outside the organization, again, with different systems of governance, incentives, talent, processes, and so on that are optimized for that activity of learning and making mistakes, stumbling along the way until you find something to try. The difference is I'll tell our corporations we work with all the time, inside a corporation, it's the frequency of correctness that matters more than the magnitude. What I mean by that is you're an executive lead in a corporation. You need to be right all the time. It doesn't matter how big that right decision turns out to be. You need to be right. Don't screw up. Don't be wrong. Inside a startup, it's the exact opposite. It's the magnitude of correctness that matters, not the frequency. Meaning you can be wrong a lot because when you are right in a startup, the results can be really outsized. So you actually want to be wrong. Try a lot of things. See what works, see what sticks. When you stumble into something that does work, it can have really amazing consequences. So that said, that's the fundamental tension in innovation. Corporation frequency of correctness matters more than magnitude. It's really hard to learn in that environment. Startups are great at doing that. So let's find a way to team up, combine the two.
I love it. And you mentioned your book here, and The Illusion of Innovation, which is a fantastic book, everyone. I highly suggest you pick up a copy of this. Whether you are a startup, medium, large size organization, there's so many nuggets of wisdom in here of driving innovation. But Elliott, can you speak about the title of your book, The Illusion of Innovation? Can you explain a little bit more about that and the underlining factor of that, and a little bit more in depth about kind of how you came about the illusion of innovation?
Yeah, we talk a lot. I'll step back for that for a second. Over the last 25 plus years, I've been working one way or another in corporate innovation and in startups. And I have been looking for examples of really tangible success coming out of corporate innovation teams. What I mean by that is these corporate innovation teams are set up. Standard approach for large corporations in pursuit of innovation these days, in addition to R&D and M&A and all the things they do, is to set up an innovation team and give that innovation team a mandate that says, we want you to transform our business model by going out and coming up with some ideas, running experiments, and coming up with new business models that we can adopt that will transform our company. I can, over 25 years of looking for examples of success for those teams, I can find examples on the margins where those teams have successfully increased the efficiency, they've saved expenses, maybe built some interesting low side businesses. I can't think of a single example where that approach has led to fundamental transformation of the business and employed that approach. And yet every company does it and hopes that it will lead to transformation. The fact that it doesn't is telling, and we should maybe try something different. So that in part is the illusion of innovation. Everybody knows that large organizations, there's a lot of activity that organizations, corporations pursue in the spirit of innovation. A lot of that feels like theater. Sometimes we're doing it almost virtue signaling to say, we're innovative, look at what we do. The illusion is going one step farther, doing all that stuff and believing that it's going to produce the transformation that you hope for. There's some organizations that do it kind of cynically, and they're like, okay, we got to do this to tell our board of investors that we're innovative. It may not produce anything. the illusion is going through the activity, feeling like it's going to produce the transformation, not recognizing that it's actually value destructive in most cases. And that's the illusion, and it's dangerous because it is value destructive in many cases. It's a distraction with the organization, and it leads them to miss other opportunities, or it could actually propel them to new paths for growth.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I would love to get your input on this and insight. I see a lot of large organizations where they have these transformation offices. They invest so much into whether external sources or how can we, when they hear the idea of running continual experiments and continually innovating, I think a lot of the challenge, and a lot of leaders discuss this, is that there's so many ideas and generation of ideas and different systems and processes. But a lot of the times, almost 80% of the time, especially in large organizations, the people coming up with those new systems and processes and different innovations and insights, they aren't connected to the day-to-day and execution of a lot of those ideas and insights. So do you have any advice for leaders, or what have you seen best as how can we generate these ideas and innovative insights on maybe how we can grow the business, but also ensure that it is connected to operations and driving the execution of kind of our North Star? Any insight on that, Elliott?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, the innovation activities, they have to produce a financial return eventually. And the trick is, the challenge is that most organizations in the pursuit of capital efficiency are overly focused on the near-term capital benefits from innovation that don't materialize. So it's important to separate the near-term and long-term benefits that could come from innovation. In the long term, innovation has to pay off. But what's more important is the portfolio performance rather than any individual investment that's made. In the near term, innovation's purpose is to drive learning and to create optionality for the organ. Will not, by definition, if it's transformative innovation, produce financial return in the near term. Disruptive innovation always looks financially unattractive to incumbents in the beginning. So it's first important, yes, innovation needs to be linked to strategy, but second, let's consider the near-term and long-term benefits of innovation. Let's separate, think about the metrics we use to measure our success, both near-term and long-term. They need to be different. But then it's also important to recognize, I hear this all the time in corporations too, innovation is everyone's job. No, it's not. Oh, it is not. You want some people focused on running the company. You do not want to distract them with innovation. So it's also important, again, to think about the structures that we use, the governance and centers and talent, so on. You want some people just focused on running the business. Yes, incrementally improving the business, and that is a form of innovation, driving more efficient. But for a very small group in the organization, transformative innovation is the job. Nobody else should be distracted by that. And so the hard part is you've got core transformation, where it's really not core, running that better and better. You've got then your more future focused transformation and what the organization can become. That's a relatively small investment, or should be for most organizations in terms of time, people, and money. But the two need to be coordinated. There has to be a translation and a learning that goes back and forth between the two. And for us, that's why I find these large organizations building new ventures, new startups outside the corporation is a fantastic way to run those experiments without distracting the core, but also to design those experiments in a way where they are directly linked to some need in the core business.
Jack Welch used to say that variance in business was evil. He argued that company performance should be made predictable. And one of the things that you say is that he was wrong for a lot of great things that Jack Welch did in the business realm and during his leadership tenure. Why was he wrong, Elliott?
Yeah, he's an amazing leader, amazing in many ways. And there's a lot to learn from Jack Welch, but on that one item, he was very wrong. Variance in business is not evil. And I appreciate that the time and the moment in which he made that comment, what he was trying to do is to try and take a large organization, GE, that he was running, and get errors out of the system. Let's stop making so many mistakes. Let's focus on the business. Let's do things better. That's right in spirit, wrong in tone and in message, I think, because you can't root out variance entirely. You shouldn't root out variance entirely from the system. An organization that is not making any mistakes is an organization that's not learning more. And an organization that does not have variance in it is an organization in which humans don't thrive either. Getting rid of variance, that means what we're asking for is hierarchical, top-down, kind of command and control system where everything is predictable and safe. And people don't come up with good ideas in that type of situation. Contrast that with, in the book, I contrast it with Reed Hastings, who was the CEO of Netflix, who said in direct opposition to that, he said at Netflix, they welcome a certain amount of chaos in the way that they run the company. And what he said was that the removal of error from a system is a path to sterility. Sterility is death. If you think about it, it's not life anymore. An organization that's removed all variance from its system is dying, even if the executives don't know it yet. It's on the decline. Chaos is good. And what Reed Hastings said was fertile as long as it's productive, or chaos, as long as it's productive, produces fertility, which will always beat sterility over time. And so the question for organizations is how much chaos do we want to let in the system? What's the appropriate amount of chaos? The thing that's counterintuitive is that the answer is not no chaos. There actually has to be some deliberate amount of capital inefficiency in a system for it to thrive and to continue to learn and to adapt and to go into new spaces. Otherwise, we're dying.
Why on that notion? What is your insights on why corporate lifespans are currently shrinking?
Yeah, it is a really interesting question. And there's debate, by the way, on this, whether that is even a true premise. My personal view on it at the moment is we're actually seeing perhaps maybe a barbell type of situation where for a few companies at the top, think of like a Meta right now, and driving a lot of capital efficiency over the last few years. They let go, I think, a third of their staff, running their company a lot more efficiently, and then plowing the capital that's freed up into investment in AI. They're creating $40 billion a year in AI right now, which nobody else can keep up with. And so you're going to bet on who's going to win in that space. And companies like Meta that have their ability to make that type of investment, even if half that investment is a waste. Right. Nobody can invest $20 billion a year in AI except certain companies. So you make the argument that, boy, they're running form of experiments at scale with a lot of money, and they have a good chance of being more resilient over the near term. My view is that right now what we're seeing is that it's harder for corporations to compete with the world. And that's certainly true in this decentralized era. You go back 100 years, there was an economist named Ronald Coase who ultimately won a Nobel Prize for a paper he wrote explaining why corporations exist. Because as an economist, he looked at the market, looked at the economy, and said in a perfectly efficient market, there would be no corporation. We'd all be independent actors. We would transact with one another. We'd come together to get things done and then dissipate and go do work with others. But corporations certainly do exist. And so why? What are they doing in the market? And what he explained was corporations exist to aggregate, to collect all the assets and resources they can inside the walls of the corporation to manage the transactions between those assets in a way that's more efficient than they could interact in the open market. And the difference, that efficiency, is translated into profit for the corporation. Now, the question then is that's true, and that works in an environment where the transaction costs, the ability to communicate and find deals and get things done outside the corporation, is more expensive than it is inside the corporation. But in many cases, that's not true anymore due to advances in technology and communication, access to capital. Transaction costs are often cheaper outside a corporation than inside. And so the thing is that corporations haven't changed their approach. We're still operating in this world of 100 years ago where it was cheaper to do things inside the corporation. In many cases, that's just not true anymore. And so the old model for a corporation was like a medieval walled city where we pull things in and protect it. And I think the new model has to be something a lot more porous, where things are going in and out. I think the secret for corporations winning from here on out it's going to be more about coordinating outside assets and resources rather than controlling them inside the corporation. And that's a very different mindset and very different purpose for a corporation, actually.
And I mean, that's right along the lines of another confrontational like question is, what would you say is wrong with business schools and modern management with maybe how 20 years ago to even now?
Yeah. I loved my time with business school and I'd do it again. But it's interesting that the lessons I learned at business school are maybe not the lessons that were intended. I learned, for example, that none of the buildings were named after investment bankers or consultants. 100% of them were named after entrepreneurs who succeeded and made a donation back in school. Like that's a really important lesson. That I'm glad I got from business school. Think about the way that modern management is taught, and we're very good at it. And we've been better at it. Think how much we've learned over the last 30 years about organizational behavior and driving these large scale enterprises. It's very siloed. Finance, marketing, operations, these things that are taught as their own independent disciplines. And yeah, we teach through the case method often in business school, where you're supposed to bring these things together, but still it's kind of separate. And then we run our companies that way too, where you've got these different divisions and things are in silos. The reality is business doesn't work that way. It's all linked together. It's all tied together. That's one challenge with the way we teach management. It's not as siloed as school would have you believe. And number two, everything is driving towards, again, these metrics of capital efficiency that seem to have been prioritized over everything else. We prioritize returns to shareholders. Like I said, there's a lot of other ways perhaps to measure company success, not only duration, but think about returns to society, returns to the employees. I remember being at a company years ago. I was just starting out in my job at a business school. I'm looking out of the parking lot of the company, thousands of cars, each of those representing an employee and their loved ones, knowing that this was a company that had been started by a single guy in his garage. And I thought, that's amazing. Surely that counts for something in terms of the measure of success for a company. The fact that you could have thousands of employees earning a good income and doing things that they and their family want to accomplish. So there's also ways to measure success. In business school, we learn that nothing matters as much as RONA and ROIC. And maybe over the long run, that's true. But I'd argue over quarterly and annual increments, that is not true.
Many of the lessons that I've learned, even just in business, came from the game of football and just so many of the great coaches I've had. Obviously, there's differences there, but there's a lot of similarities. Would you say that maybe the safety aspect too, as it relates to maybe everything that could go wrong? Like, have you noticed with your work with startups, the difference between entrepreneurs and founders who didn't go to business school versus those that did? Is there a difference in risk-taking, a level of boldness and courageousness in their decision-making? Have you noticed any difference there?
Yeah, maybe that's true. I hadn't thought of it that way. There is certainly I think of some of the most successful entrepreneurs who've accomplished big things, or maybe the best educated, but were willing to try things and put themselves in a position to do amazing things. So maybe there is a lesson in that. There's a lesson in that. The thing in business, here's the thing to remember, is that to succeed in business over time, you've got to be contrarian. You've got to go against the flow and turn out to be right. So we often, in the world of venture capital I operate in, we think about things in a 2x2. Where on one axis, you've got consensus, non-consensus ideas. And on the other axis, you can turn out to be right, you can turn out to be wrong. Well, when you're making bets as a venture investor, or when you're leading a business, if you go along with the consensus and you turn out to be right, you're leading a business that's actually a path to failure, a path to going out of business ultimately. Because you're doing the same thing everybody else does, you're going to get out competed by somebody who comes in. If you turn out to be wrong, well, that doesn't matter, right? You lose either way. But so the only way you actually win over time is by being contrarian, going against the consensus and turning out to be right. And so that means you have to do things that are controversial. Indeed, over time, you can't play it safe. It also means you need to think about how do you systematically stumble into those ideas that are contrarian. Most of what we do inside of large corporations is designed to reinforce what we already know or to help us feel better about what we believe, rather than challenge our status quo beliefs or uncover anomalies or tell us where we're wrong. But that's the secret. That's the trick to winning in the long run. You've got to somehow systematically even come up with a way to counter those non-consensus or adopt those non-consensus ideas.
I love that. Elliott, one of the things that really fascinated me about the book is what can we learn from Steph Curry about running big companies?
I learned a lot of things from Steph Curry. That guy's amazing. It's really interesting to look at the NBA is fascinating because back in 1978 or so, they decided to change the game pretty dramatically by implementing the 3-point rule. So those who are familiar with basketball, normal shot in basketball counts for 2 points. And what they did in the NBA is they drew a line of paint a certain distance from the basket and said, if you can make a basket from beyond this line, it's going to be worth 3 points. And initially the rule change wasn't, people didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. In fact, there's a great quote from when the announcement came out from the guy who ultimately the next year became the top 3-point shooter. He's like, I don't know if he was pinching. He would be a top 3-point shooter that next year. But since then, the game has changed dramatically. If you look, even in the last 5 years, you look at a map of where shots are taken in an NBA game, and now they're almost entirely taken right under the basket or just beyond the 3-point line. Because teams have learned that probability, the way to score, you're better off taking a lot more carefully placed 3-point shot. And so what does this have to do with corporations? What is Steph Curry's ability to nail these 3-pointers all the time have to do with corporations? There's often a question of what matters more, the quality of shots in terms of experiments things we're trying, or the quantity. And the answer is both. And we see this in the NBA, right? The teams that win the most are the teams that take the most shots, but also they do it strategically from beyond the 3-point line and right under the basket. And I think there's a good analogy for corporations. You think about innovating. Where are we taking our shots? How many shots are we taking? What we often see in corporation is we take too few shots. If things are too centralized or too expensive, it's a hope and a focus on quality over quantity. You need both. It's really hard to predict ahead of time which new experiments are going to pan out and work. And so you need to try a lot of things. And if you're Steph Curry, you know that to be true, and that's how you win games. Same is true of corporation. The best artists in the world are the most prolific, right? Another example is Picasso made a painting every single day of his adult life. From the time he was 20 until he passed away in his 90s, he produced a painting viewed as one of the best artists in the world. It's in part because he was so darn prolific. He tried a lot of things. You think about innovating in the world of venture capital, which I operate. Venture capital is what we call a power law asset class. What you mean by that is 1 or 2 bets that you make are going to pay for everything else. Because that law, you're going to try some crazy things. Most of the things you try are not going to work out. You're going to lose money. But boy, 1 or 2 bets that you make will pay it more than pay off for everything else. That's a power law asset class. That's different from like public equities, which is more of a standard distribution where you're going to invest in public equities. You can almost throw a dart at the wall and pick 25, 30 stocks at random. You have a pretty good shot of getting industry average returns. Right. Not true in venture capital. You have to place a lot more bets because you don't know ahead of time which ones are going to work out. And so you need a broad and diverse portfolio. The same is true for corporations that are innovating. You ought to think about insight as a power law asset. And the goal of an innovation team or a corporation is to collect as many insights as possible. Knowledge compounds over time, and you don't know which insights you're going to turn out to be the most important. You need to gather a lot of them. You need to treat them like your power law asset class, quality and quantity. Don't run a lot of experiments for the lowest cost possible per experiment. You need to gather insight.
I love that. I mean, I even think writing a book is a lot like Picasso, like what you said. I mean, I'm sure with your first draft of The Illusion of Innovation, I'm sure it was much different than the second draft, right? And then the round of edits. So I just published my 3rd book. And it's an unbelievable process. But hey, there's sometimes 5, 6, 7 different drafts. But if you have this idea of perfectionism, you've already lost the game.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to try a lot of things. A corporate innovation leader told me once that his company was really good at failing slowly and at scale. Meaning they were running very few experiments. It was centralized. Whether they succeeded or failed, it was super expensive. And that's very different from, for example, how we see innovation happen in naturally resilient, like ecosystems of nature. The Amazon Journal explained the book is a great example of how innovation happened very effectively in a way when it's not top down, not hierarchical, almost a random walk. There are no objectives, only constraints. And it worked really, really well. It's almost the exact opposite in every way of what we do inside of corporations when it comes to innovating, where everything is top down, it's objectives driven.
Why should we be optimistic about the future, Elliott?
For a lot of reasons. Edwin Land was the CEO of Polaroid, founder of Polaroid years ago, an amazing entrepreneur, more people should know about. And he used to say all the time, optimism is a moral duty. And I agree with that. Actually, I think we've got a moral duty to be optimistic because that leads us to think over long timelines. It leads us to build things for those yet to come. It leads us to want to be good ancestors. I think we should all want to be good ancestors for those yet to come. But the thing about being an optimist, and let me define what it means to be an optimist, by the way. A lot of people have a misconception that being an optimist is believing that everything's going to be great from here on out.
Right.
That is not what an optimist recognizes there are going to be problems, really important problems. Every solution creates new problems, right? But an optimist recognizes that our ability to address those problems is going to continue to increase. And one of my favorite charts of all time is the chart looking at global GDP over time. People chart this, and it's hard to get the exact numbers right, but I think directionally it's correct. We're looking at global GDP all the way back to their Middle Ages. And we are living in the middle of this exponential growth curve, where just in the last 100 years, global GDP has increased dramatically. We've gotten incredibly wealthier. And there's no reason to believe that, and that's just one metric for, quality of life, but there's no reason to believe that the trends that caused that exponential growth are going away or changing anytime soon. There will be little dips and downturns here and there, but over time, we should expect things to continue to get better in almost every measurable way across a long timeline. And so for that reason, we should be optimistic too. And here's the other thing that's important. When you look over history, compare optimists and pessimists, who turned out to be right more often? Well, it was the optimists. It's been the optimists so far. There's a great quote. I wish I remembered who said it, but the quote is that pessimists sound smarter than optimists make money. And so there's another reason. Yeah, just replay. If you're cynical, reasons you want to make money should be an optimist. But here's the other thing. We talked about the importance of being contrarian and being right. Optimists are more right over time. And for the first time in a long time, actually somewhat contrarian to be an optimist these days. People have done surveys on society broadly, looking at whether people feel optimistic about the future. They feel like people are going to be better 20 years from now than they were 20 years ago for people. And for the first time, since these surveys have been done, the majority of people in some cases are not optimistic about the future. Crazy. We have every reason to be optimistic. There's no better time to be alive than these are only going to get better on average over time. So if you want to be not consensus and right, a really easy way to do it is just to be an optimist right now.
I think being optimistic doesn't guarantee success, but you're in a much better advantage than being pessimistic.
Yeah. Well, it'll help you identify opportunities, right?
Right.
Again, you talk about 10 years building for stuff to mission. If you're optimistic about the future, you're more likely to be right.
Absolutely. Before I get to my very last question, Elliott, and this has been a great conversation today, very fascinating. As the CEO and founder of High Alpha Innovation, is there any challenges that you're currently working on right now, or just any examples, experiences that you feel is very pertinent to this conversation that we're having here now as it relates to innovation? Anything that you're seeing in the marketplace that you've experienced over the past couple of years that you think is vitally important as it relates to this conversation of innovation?
So in our work, I mean, my company, what we do is we build startups with corporations, with universities, sometimes with government too. We partner as a way to help these organizations access innovation that would otherwise be hard, and build startups that are more likely to succeed than your average startup in the wild. And we learned a lot over the years about how to govern these things, how to set them up right, how to get the incentive system correct so everybody wins. What gives me some comfort and makes me feel pretty optimistic about the future is that a lot more organizations are looking at venture building as a way to run these experiments, access anomaly, uncover new pathways to growth. And we've got some great examples now in our portfolio of startups that are driving real transformation back into corporations that help launch their startups. I was at an innovation conference a couple of months ago where 90% of the content was probably on venture building. That's not the only path to innovation, but I think it's an important one that more organizations should recognize could be a really important tool. And so right now, if there's anything that we are faced in terms of challenge, it's just educating and telling people why a corporation, a scaled corporation, should want to build external startups where they may be a minority owner in those ventures. Not intuitive, but once you go through the reasoning and talk about how these things drive learning and optionality, it becomes clear that it's something most large corporations should be doing.
And my last and final question, Elliott, is, and this relates to, I mean, the whole purpose of this podcast is Get Better Today. It's all about actionable things that we could be doing every single day to be 1% better than we were the day before. What is the first step a leader can take and really do today to start embracing chaos and seek out radical progress?
Go pursue what's interesting. And don't feel bad about it. In the book, there's a great example of Walt Disney, right? How he went and got sick of making movies, got burned out, and got fascinated with model trains. And that led him ultimately to come up with the idea for Disneyland. Sometimes that pursuit of interestingness in its own right is worthwhile, even if it feels like it may be undirected, lacking direction in the beginning without clear objectives. That's okay. That actually produces good things. And statistically speaking, you're more likely to stumble into big opportunities if you just pursue what is interesting. So I think as an executive in a large company, look at the ways that your company is pursuing things that are interesting. Are we running enough experiments to challenge status quo thinking? And then am I doing that in my own life? Actually, am I pursuing things that are interesting so that I can continually learn? Set the example. You're going to uncover new ways of thinking, maybe like Walt Disney, and uncover a whole new industry. Do it right.
I love it. I actually put in my most recent book, The Transformational Leader, that just came out, that radical curiosity is a characteristic of all great exceptional leaders that really isn't talked about too much. You know, there's this radical curiosity about, even if they're doing something great, right? It's, can we do it better, more efficiently? So I love that idea.
Yeah. And then, boy, people shouldn't feel bad about that. It's not just a means to an end. It's an end in itself. It can produce really good outcomes. So go
Absolutely.
do it. Go be curious.
Absolutely. Well, Elliott, thank you so much for your time here today, and I really do appreciate it here. Everybody, go pick up a copy of The Illusion of Innovation. You will not regret it. Regardless of your station in life, this book holds immense value for a skill and characteristic that will benefit your career and your future. So please get that copy of The Illusion of Innovation. Elliott, where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you and learn more about your services and so forth?
You find me on Twitter, X, Parker, or at my website, erparker.com.
Perfect. Elliott, thank you so much for your time. This was a fantastic conversation today. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. It was super fun. Thanks, man.